Hi everyone, delonewolf here, and welcome back to EVE Talk, your weekly look at the market in EVE Online. As always, we'll try to start with a little bit of news, but I'll be honest, I took a little bit of a break last week, basically just relaxing, not doing much of anything to recharge the batteries. Not for EVE Online, I actually played the game a little bit every day, but from work and real life, which well, honestly, news is kind of depressing. But we'll see, we'll push through all of that, and when it comes to news in EVE Online, I only noticed one thing. It was actually a Reddit post. I haven't seen the official post on that myself. I'm assuming it's actually a forum post that I might have to look at. But there's talk of some PI materials coming to moon mining, some low tier PI materials. So to me, honestly, that doesn't make too much sense. Number one, I don't think low tier PI materials are a problem. From what we've seen in EVE Talk, they're actually plentiful, oversupplied, really down in price. And then the other thing, of course, is that it's going to, it goes against that philosophy of you shouldn't be able to just get everything from a single spot, and then they're just adding something which you would need PI materials and a structure behind that from another single spot, which is moon mining, that takes even more importance. So not really sure about that change, but we will see. Of course, perhaps CCP has a rationale for that one. Other than that, honestly guys, not too much. I do think that CCP is taking a careful look at what they're exactly planning to do, because the announcement of the end of scarcity didn't really feel like a complete turnaround there for a lot of players. And well, you've got waste basically on compression as well. Compression that is being looked at. Hopefully they can tone down the complexity and they can make it a smooth gameplay experience, because something like 30 modules to compress stuff really doesn't make a lot of sense. It feels like that's way too complex compared to what it should be. We have compression that's just a couple of clicks in structures and in stations. So in structures actually only at this point. NPC stations don't have it anymore, but it should be something that's really simple in my opinion. But we'll see, of course, how things develop, and we'll try to keep an eye on all of that. That means that we do get to take a quick look at the New Eden store. There should be a sale going on at the moment, a Black Friday sale, of course. Let's see if there's anything noticeable here. MCT, a month Omega with free Dracovac skin, with a free Kikimora skin. Right, so a couple of sales down here. Other than that, we're not noticing too much. And then on the services front, you get these sales here yet again. So it's up to 25% off of Omega or something like that at the moment, which is the Black Friday sale. It's really not going to last for very long. So if you want to take advantage of that, you can do so right now, of course. Free skins, always a nice bonus if you're into that. That means that we get to move on pretty quickly here to the market, and let's start with some plex and stuff coming in at 330. And there we go, and let's get started. So here is plex. You may already have noticed that on the ticker as well, really going back down a substantial amount on the chart. It is on volumes though, so obviously the CCP sale, the Black Friday sale, has something to do with the current decline. I'm a little bit surprised that it's just following the same trend that we saw after basically reaching the 1 year high point. It is a double top, and so here you can see like a sort of a head and shoulders pattern, I think it's called. I do try to watch some market not videos, but programs from time to time, just to see if I can spot some stuff as well during EVE Talk. And so your next support, I think you could say, is probably going to be at around the 2.75 million for plex. Now the ending of the plex sale could end that a little bit sooner, but you do have here a little bit of a shoulders, then the head, and then down here we're in all likeliness with this sale gonna bounce up to that 275 million. Sellers are already coming in below 2.9 million, and there was another aggressive one when I was taking a look at it to make the ticker But yeah, 2.9 million for most sellers, but below 2.8 million towards at 2.75 million for the buyers, which is of course that support that we were talking about. If we take a look at the Tranquility Trading Tower or the player-owned trade hubs around JITA, it's really in line with the 2.9 million for the sellers. And let's see if buyers become more aggressive. No, on this downtrend, you could say, on this recovery from the 1-year high point, exacerbated by the plex sale that's happening, they're pretty much in line with each other towards that, 2.75 million, a little bit above that for the buyers, and 2.9 million for the sellers. So a bit of pressure, which is natural. It was already happening at the moment, but at the moment, I think that we get that extra pressure that's going to accelerate things a little bit with the sale that's happening. Next up, we've got the multiple pilot training certificate. That you can see the correlation between plex and the training certificate is very strong, but because of the much lower volumes on the training certificate, anything like a sale has a much more immediate effect. As you've got a double top here as well, you get a shoulder just below 1.4 billion, and then here you've got that massive downtrend with today's daily average is actually getting close to 1.3 billion already. It's a 1.4 billion for the sellers, but below 1.3 billion for the buyers. So if you look at the current averages, they're definitely playing with that support right here, which is not that plentiful because it is such a small market compared to plex. It makes it a lot more volatile and a lot less predictable than plex, which of course takes way more product in order to or way more individual sales in order to have any significant impact on the chart or a difference in trend and things like that. You can also see 1 million a day is easily achieved on most days when it comes to the plex transactions. Next up, let's take a look at the skill extractors that are slowly going down. So all of this, I think, is just a natural double top, which you can see here as well. Went to 350 million ISK, below 330 could be seen as your next support, but we don't have a direct skill extractor sale, so you do have the Black Friday sale that has to push through plex and then goes into the extractor market. I do expect a little bit more pressure mounting at the moment in this market as well. Sellers coming in at 333 million, buyers at 321. You can see much more narrow margin, but fresh supply that can be achieved now, I think, through cheaper plex might find its way into this market, putting a little bit of pressure, but I don't expect us to really break below the 330 million on the average prices. Impact on the injectors, I'm expecting a little bit of pressure with all of this. Yeah, we did top out at 680 million. This is much more of a uniform top here, I would say. And then we're already hitting that previous top right here, and we're starting to move sideways at this point. That's kind of interesting, although maybe not a complete surprise. Skill injectors, have that component of, is there demand for skill points out there? And I think with the nerf to the Rorqual, quite a bit of changing of characters might be on the books. And I think the nerf for the Rorqual is pretty much inevitable. So large skill injectors are selling for 674 million, bars at 638. I personally think that that's a pretty normal, healthy margin for this good. And so we can start to see a little bit of sideways movement on the daily averages, 5-day moving average, starting to smooth out here. So I think we're finding our range at the moment for the large skill injectors, and I think we do have a large demand part as big nullsec entities and players with like multi-boxing Rorqual characters and things like that are probably stocking up on this as well, in preparation for perhaps new roles for those characters. Small skill injectors, I think, should be doing pretty nicely as well. And yep, these are basically recovering already in the last couple of days. You can see the 5-day moving average going back up. We hit, I think this is going to be the 135 million. We have to remember that this isn't exactly showing the exact number all the time, but you can see here the trend is clearly back up already. 141 million for the sellers, 129 for the buyers. In between that is the 135 million range, so it doesn't make sense that this would be 135 here and 140 here. I think this is 135, and we're starting to move up, so the sellers are again dominating the price setting for the averages, and I think that again shows decently strong demand in preparation for all of the changes that will inevitably hit the game, although it's still in limbo a little bit as to what CCP is planning to do exactly. Then we've got, so those were the injectors, the daily alpha injectors next. Obviously still trying to recover from that massive sale that CCP has done, right? We could hardly break 500 transactions a day. We end up to well above 1500, so that's a pretty big sale that did drive a lot of opportunity. I think it's kind of normal. You had a perfect storm, so basically a perfect placement for this sale. Daily alpha injectors were selling for above 50 million, which is a pretty hefty daily goal for an alpha player to set, and it shows, in my opinion, that there is a large part of the player base that is playing the game as alpha clones, basically the free-to-play version for EVE Online. And then they did notice that opportunity. Well, I can get very high price for this daily alpha injection. There will be investors in all this mix as well, but perhaps this was their nice opportunity to support the game all of a sudden. When CCP came out with that daily alpha injector sale, I'm not really sure what kind of packages were available at that time, but if you could then combine that with, all right, I can basically feed my alpha character for a while, but I can also get the best bang for my buck here, 50 million for these daily alpha injectors. Let's sell a number of these as well, and that gave us these massive volumes, and now we're back down to 40 million ISK, which I think for the other alpha players is very nice. They can keep up with improving their character on a daily basis by just earning 40 million rather than more than 50. So this is a very nice little chart from that alpha clone perspective, and I do think that this is something that CCP mentioned. I'm not exactly sure. I think it was one of the live streams. That this is something that they are actively doing at the moment, that is filling, deciding on when should we inject stuff, you could say, into the economy, and one aspect of that are the events, daily events and things like that, right? They can decide on putting in more commodities if they basically want to print more ISK, or they can decide on putting more stuff. You can imagine that they could do very nice salvage targets and things like that, if that's where they want to introduce more stuff into the game. But it could be that this philosophy exists as well with the sales, and that daily alpha injector sale basically makes a hell of a lot of sense from that perspective. So we're back at, let's see here, for the sellers 42 million, 37.5 million for the buyers. Basically for 40 million you're getting your daily alpha injector back, which I think is definitely that sweet spot, or maybe even a little bit below that sweet spot for the daily alpha injectors for those alpha clone players. And then finally we get the hypercores that are, well, staying surprisingly high despite the plex sale, despite the pressure that we're seeing in the extractors and the multiple pilot trains, because this one is staying really high, and I think that that makes sense, as hopefully we will see that end of scarcity, and that more ISK is flowing into the game potentially at the moment. So I think that for the longer term, inflation is going to be a little bit of a reality, and the hypercores are showing that. I think at least part of the market is saying, yeah, ISK is not necessarily going to become more valuable, so stuff should not become cheaper. We don't expect a deflationary scenario in EVE Online at the moment. Still well above 300,000 ISK at 313 for the sellers of hypercores. Buyers coming in at 293,000. Pretty narrow margin for this pretty high price. A little bit of pressure, but I think that's normal when you're reaching 1-year high points yet again, not that long ago. Let's move on then to the minerals market, coming in at 1340. And you may already have seen that on the ticker as well, as titanium is continuing a slow ascent and went well above 4.5 ISK. So now, the post-industry changes chart does start to look like we made our way back to the previous averages. Sellers in JITA are coming in at almost 5 ISK, 496 for titanium. Buyers coming in at 485, and that's something, I haven't followed it, but there's like a post or a news article about potentially a strike of miners coming into EVE Online. Very interesting idea, but I have to say, I do think that when it comes to minerals, when it comes to ores, compressed ores and things like that, there is inertia in the system. So having a strike, active supply cause a real pain to the economy is going to be pretty hard to do. Even myself, I mine from time to time, and I have some pretty big compressed ore reserves and some minerals reserves as well that I could unload. And I'll be honest, if I see a better price, I'm going to bring that stuff to the market and I'm going to sell at those better prices. So if we'd go, for instance, above 5 ISK for titanium, I might just start to sell some of my reserves there as well. And I think that's going to be the reality. There are investors out there that have stuff in all shapes and sizes, but for minerals, it's actually pretty relatively easy to have big stocks because you can also easily create that stuff as well. So titanium is making its way back to 5 ISK, which is not bad. For high-sec miners, potentially a target to go for at the moment. But it's going to be interesting to see how all of this will, of course, be impacted by the changes from CCP and by the decisions of the players. Next up, we've got pyrite, also a small uptrend, making its way back above 17.5 ISK, so sort of trying to get back to that summertime activity, you could say, or price range. 1782 for the sellers, 1730 for the buyers, forced up a little bit. But this is something that might definitely happen. 100 million, 100 million, 100 million, 100 million here again. And all of these are a little bit older, but probably have been nibbled at by the market. But there's plenty of pyrite available, and these are obviously a couple of slightly more aggressive sell orders that are keeping things in check. And there's plenty more out there, honestly. Then we've got the Mexalon chart that had this nice run up a couple of weeks ago, basically tried to get back towards 70-75 ISK. Did have to come back down, but right at the tail end you can see we're starting to see the upwards pressure here as well. 66 ISK pretty much for the sellers, 62 for the buyers, again pretty narrow margin, and here we get a couple, 16 million, 22 million, 23 million actually on the volumes, but most of them are just a couple of million, which to me feels like pretty regular supply. So the potential upside for Mexalon on a strike or something like that might be there. I would hold off then on Mexalon, and I'd be selling titanium this week. Next up, we've got Isogen. I'm always curious to see what that one is doing, and ooh, man, it is continuing up to 125 ISK, 1 year high point yet again. And yeah, you can see these steps, right? 50, well above 50, so that's going to be what, 60-ish? Yep, 60 ISK right here. Managed to maintain that for a couple of months, but then we'd have spike up above 75, and here we definitely broke above the 75, above the 100, and now we're touching 125. 125 ISK for the sellers, 122 for the buyer. So again, really narrow margin, which is normal. Isogen needs to come mostly from low-sec at the moment, and this is what I was sort of waiting for. We still have a couple of bigger sellers waiting here, 25 million, 25 million, down here another 68 million, and then down here at 500 ISK, someone is betting that within 40 days we'll reach 500 ISK for Isogen with 220 million units. I think that's perhaps a little bit fast, but the trend is clearly up quite substantially. And here 7.5, 500,000 units. You know, these are starting to dominate those new sell orders that are competing and bouncing up against those old reserves, and we're definitely starting to phase this out. You can see that, let's say, the top 6-7 of them or so are way more in line with the volumes that we've seen in Mexalon, which comes way closer to what I would expect the Isogen sell orders to look like. So yeah, another step up. I think the presence of 20 million orders here. I mean, on this front page, we're still talking 50, 60, 70, almost 100 million units of Isogen. Still shows that there are reserves, and so I think a 150, even a 180 for this one is potentially easily possible. But to really go towards 500, I'm not sure, but I think that's perhaps a little bit too optimistic in my opinion. But it's pretty obvious that again we're bouncing up against those big reserves, and they are starting to become smaller and smaller in volumes as well. And the new supply just isn't there. So anytime a big buyer comes in, it takes a big chunk of those old reserves at the price that they're listed at, and we start to push through these from time to time. You can see here basically on like a bi-weekly basis, I think we're jumping up at this point for Isogen. Very nice. This was a prediction that I've been making for a pretty long time, but it is starting to really show on the chart. And then eventually, of course, we'll get to a price that will not break Noxium, but we should then start to see a rhyming, I think, between Isogen and Noxium, since both of these are mostly sourced from lowsec. And this one, after basically settling down on 1,000 disk for a little bit, is starting to go back up. 1,100 for the seller, still 1,000 for the buyers, but here this feels way more like active supply demand on this chart. You get a little bit more of a wavy pattern, sometimes perhaps a little bit oversupplied, and then we go down in price. Sometimes supplies are not plentiful, maybe pirates were a little bit more successful, and then we can reach 1250. So that's definitely pretty interesting. And then volume wise, you can see here we got a 3 million ISK sell order, and that's the largest one that we have on the entire front page. So this clearly again shows that different dynamic compared to what's happening in the Isogen market volume wise. But we're catching up. We're slowly starting to finally normalize that one as well. Then we've got the Zydrine chart from nullsec that did just rush up to 1,000 disk and is now basically starting to move on that 1,000 disk for the 5-day moving average. 1,150 for the sellers, 1,000 disk for the buyers. I think the story here is pretty obvious. Rorqual nerf, and basically a lot of Zydrine is sourced from Rorquals in nullsec, and that could take a dive in just how much you can create an hour. The Rorqual is getting nerfed, getting pushed back down towards what the mining barges and other mining ships can do. So the total yield per hour in nullsec should take a dive, and the market is basically expecting that to have an impact on Zydrine. And then, well, it was a little bit of a surprise, but yeah, you guys mentioned it quite often. Megasite, although a little bit of upper pressure, is clearly not breaking that trend and let's say moving into like a 650 or a 700 range on lower supplies, and that is because there is Megasite available in Triglavian space, which eventually does find its way into the market as well. It's also less needed, I think, industry-wise than Zydrine. And so we're talking 583 for the sellers and 545 for the buyers, which is, well, I would say a very reasonable price for Megasite that obviously has a different dynamic from Zydrine at the moment. And then finally, we've got the Morphite chart that's continuing to see a little bit of a pressure here. 61,000 for the sellers, 58,000 for the buyers. And you could say, why doesn't Morphite move the same way like as Zydrine? I think because in any mining operation, Morphite will always get the priority, at least on this at these prices of well above 50,000 disk. It's just extremely expensive, and so even if your yield per hour might go down, you are going to always get that Morphite out of the way, and there should be more supplies if ores get doubled with New Dawn, with the next patch. Who knows when that's going to come, though, of course. I'm pretty sure that there's a lot of discussion happening as to what the right path to take is. And yeah, this is the baseline of EVE Online, of course. This is like the simplest profession to get into, but also one that I think a lot of players, can see themselves do. All right, I'm gonna mine a little bit every day, get a little bit of ISK that way, and then see what my future plans are. So you're really hitting the bedrock of EVE Online. It's also the bedrock of industry, which then creates almost everything into the game. So you have to be careful. I think you have to get it right on that one. Hopefully CCP will listen to the feedback, because yeah, I also don't want compression to be clunky, to force me to move stuff from one bay to another. All of that should honestly be as smooth a process as it is now, except I won't be docking, but I'll be activating a module, putting my Orca, Rorqual or whatever ship it is, into that mode so that it can compress, but then it should be as easy as it is now. So the gameplay is important, the values are important, availability, how much time does it take, yields, all of that. You need to find that right balance, because it is so important, I think, for the entire game. Minerals might not look like much, but I do think it is the bedrock for EVE Online. Next up, we've got the PI market, 2410. Here I'm expecting bad news, of course. If CCP is indeed planning to add raw PI materials to moon mining, that should just put pressure on everything, because it's just going to make everything more plentiful. An extra source of raw PI should also translate into easier construction of the other PI materials, which will bring those prices down, which is perhaps the rationale that CCP is having at the moment. But how much of an impact will it have, on those other production cycles? I'm not sure. It might just free up a couple of planets to make more broadcast nodes and things like that. Yeah, I think that already is in an economic equilibrium. So for broadcast nodes, we're continuing to go back down. 1.25 million ISK on average, almost 1.4 million for the sellers and 1.1 for the buyers. So that margin just has opened up and the price is falling right into that. Basically, we were already at a high point of 2 million and going back down. I think again that transition towards producing more of this stuff was happening, and then of course CCP announced that we would need less advanced PI materials in the construction of a lot of the capital ships, so that was another leg down. And now of course, if they're also going to introduce the base materials into moon mining, it's just going to make it even cheaper, and thus we are continuing to go back down. Construction blocks hit a one-year low point here of 6,000 ISK. We're bouncing up a little bit from that. We're talking 7,000 for the sellers, 6,000 for the buyers. So that pressure is undeniable, I think. Yeah, why would you need more raw materials to more easily make construction blocks when they're already at this price? I'm not sure, but that's what's happening. Consumer electronics just, stuck at 6K as well, which is very, very cheap for consumer electronics. Next up, we've got the coolants that are also going back down on this news, reaching one-year high point. 11,000 ISK was back in the normal range, you could say, and we're breaking straight through the 10 down to less than 9,000 ISK. 9,100 for the first seller, 9,400 for most sellers, but 8,200 for the buyers. So that demand is just dropping off, and they're saying you're gonna have to sell it way cheaper to us because it's gonna become that much more plentiful. There's gonna be that much more room for stuff to be created if another spigot opens up, if another supply line opens up. So kind of a normal reaction, I think. One exception here, apparently, cryoprotectant solutions back up a little bit in price. 100,000 for the sellers, 96 for the buyers. I'd say that that's a normal average price. Perhaps someone is in the know on implants. I'll be honest, if I'm thinking about this now, is there a chance for more implants that's being created through the announcement from CCP? Perhaps, right? Compression implants might just become a thing as well, since there is now going to be waste on implants. Improving your character through implants to reduce compression waste might just be something that's on the book as well. So if you were to speculate on one thing, is that more types of implants might be coming out. And I've always been a little bit wary of, how much more complexity is CCP willing to put into the game. But if they're willing to put in 30 or something like that compression modules to bring it to 3 ships, then yeah, they're not afraid of increasing complexity, and so adding even more implants for compression and maybe mining waste, things like that might just be a thing as well. Then we've got enriched uranium that's stuck at 8,750, which is a little bit more expensive than construction blocks, consumer electronics, but it is tied to fuel, so that one had a slightly better run. Then we've got, not going to open up the mail right now, but we'll take a look at it later. Integrity response drones, yeah, taking that beating down to less than 1.5 million. I don't think we'll exceed that. No, 1.4 in fact for the first seller, 1.5 million for most, but 1.3 million for the buyer. So that again is opening up that margin. Mechanical parts stuck at 7,500, which again is still 25% below what I remember an average mechanical parts price to be. On the high point of the chart because it's tied to fuels. Then we've got nanite stuck at 5,000 ISK refined, so that's really not very expensive. First seller in fact coming in just below 5,000 ISK, 4,500 for the buyers. And then we should see more pressure. Here's nano factories, right? Big volume increase and yet no price response. So we're talking 660,000. Look at how aggressive they're as well, from 780 down to 660 on the front page, and buyers are dwindling to 600 120,000 ISK, which is just down here on the chart, close to the 1-year low points. Organic motor applicators, as expected, breaking down below 700,000. 620 for the buyers. They've just opened up that margin, and sellers are, filling that gap pretty quickly. Recursive computing modules, let's see if we can get that chart to also, yeah, there we go, showing the decline now below 1 million. And sellers at 990, buyers at 900,000, and you can see we're not talking a lot of buyers anymore. Robotics, tied to fuels, so that one climbing, but again, my historical perspective for robotics is 100,000 ISK. We're now at 65,000, yeah, almost for the sellers, 61.5 for the buyers. Tied to fuels, it's got a little bit better demand, but that's really it. Self-harmonizing power cores from 1.5 to 125 million. And we're just, breaking down. We're less than 1.1 million for the buyers. Sterile conduits, well, landing now, so, but again, the volumes are up, and then the price is not responding. Less than 1 million for the sellers, 817,000 for the buyers. You come with superconductors, bit of pressure here, and then finally the wetware mainframes also dropping off. Are we below 1.5 million for the daily average? We are, but yeah, look at that, 1.5 million now for the sellers, 1.3 million for the buyers, that are just dropping off and getting filled, I think, by people that are saying, all right, I'm not holding on to this anymore, dumping. So we get these higher volumes with either lower prices or no price response in advanced PI materials. Yeah, that is of course pretty normal if CCP opens up another faucet for the baseline materials for PI. We'll see if it happens or not. Next, we've got the advanced moon materials, 31 minutes. Let's take a little bit of time. There we go. So for these advanced moon materials, honestly, I think we're not expecting too much of an impact with all of this. Might be a little bit of pressure, I would say, but let's see what happens. We'll start, as always, with the carbides. So crystalline carbonite for Galente, settling between 150 and 175. A slight uptick from the start of the year, but overall a pretty reasonable price. 167 to 157, also a pretty narrow margin. So basically, yeah, price discovery with a slight margin compared to the start of the year. Titanium carbide, I'm expecting the same story. Look at that, a little bit of pressure. Going down below 175 as well. Started the year just below 150, and we're now talking 173 to 163. That's again just a 10 ISK margin between these two, but right on the average, very, very reasonable. And again, a slight margin compared to the start of the year, but over a 1-year period, this is not a big move at all. Then we've got for Minmatar Fernite Carbide, that's actually up a little bit on the week, but this is moving nicely in that 150 to 175. So basically we've got all three of them coming together at a price of around 170 on average. 170 for the sellers, 157 for the buyers, which is again 12 ISK here in margin, not a lot. So we're finding our price. Basically we are completely absorbing all of the volatility of the war and of the industry changes in April, and the end result is a slightly higher price from about a year ago, but definitely quite doable. Then we've got tungsten carbide, that's actually breaking the trend here, but not in a worrying way. It's breaking the trend by reaching the previous average from the start of the year again, just below 150 ISK, 146 for the sellers, 132 for the buyers. Just a little bit of pressure on that one. Which has also translated, if I'm not mistaken, in the Tech-to-ship market in some buy opportunities for Amar ships. Then we get the metamaterials. As always, we start with Galente. So here's photonic metamaterials. Really not much to say. We do have basically that April-May dome where prices were more expensive, but I'm sure you guys remember that was the introduction of the industry changes. Everyone felt like, all right, this is a complete revolution. Everything is changing massively. So we had massive speculation and things like that in pretty much all the raw materials, including, since CCP did say next up is going to be Tech 2. That never actually happened. But then the end result here is that we started in an 11 to 12k, close to 12k on average, and we're right back there. 11,400 for the sellers, 10,730 for the buyers. Much more healthy margin, I would say, giving a little bit of room for the price to move, but we're clearly back where we were a year ago when it comes to the metamaterials here, at least for the photonic one so far. Then we've got non-linear for Caldari, just below 20k again. This might actually seem like an early one, but speculation on industry changes is part of the game as well. So we get this March spike up to 30,000 disc, but we're right back 20k-ish, 19,300 for the sellers, 19,000 for the buyers. So this has room to land on 19 and to get back towards 20,000. So all in all, for Tech 2, at least here we have some stability. Then we've got the plasmonic metamaterials for Minmatar that actually started a little bit low, but we're again 15 to 20k. We're right in the middle of all of this. Honestly, we don't have to go too much into detail on these. Terahertz metamaterials next. I did again go to the low point as well a couple of weeks ago. 12,500 disc is back at 15,000, which I think for this chart is right on the money for being normal average. 15,000 for the sellers and almost 15 for the buyers as well. So this is, in my opinion, an established market, a healthy market. It's got demand supply. Sometimes we move down a little bit on oversupply or on less demand, and the reverse can happen as well. But we are in pretty affordable, normal territory. The other advanced moon materials have all been suffering, at least here from ionic condensates is crawling out of the hole in 3 months time from a 1-year low point at 50,000 disc. It's back at 67,000 for the sellers, 63 for the buyers, which is a more normal price on this 1-year chart. I think historically though, it's still a pretty low price. Ferrogel has also known a first volatile spike up to 45,000, something like that, I think. Very quickly plugged, of course, plenty of supplies out there. Let's see where we're landing. 33,000 for the sellers, 32,000 for the buyers. That's actually a pretty narrow margin here again. Maybe demand is picking up on these. That would be good news for the prices. Fullerite though is back under pressure below 750. 700 for the seller, 692 though. So yeah, you get that demand that will keep this from completely crashing down to like a 500 disc range or something like that, I think. So that's good news. Hypersynaptic fibers actually had to jump up to 11k as well. Is now normalizing at 10,000 disc. A little bit of supply coming in, 9,000 for the buyers. That's still a normal margin, I would say, especially for these above average prices. Nano transistors, these are still under pressure. 3.9 for the sellers, 3.8 for the buyers though. Yeah, buyers are coming back in. So that's I would say that I'm seeing that as good news for potentially finally having a little bit more stability in these other advanced materials, not just this is bad, and then potentially, of course, having a little bit of speculation and some spikes, which could eventually translate into more volatility in Tech 2 in general. Phenolic composites are still pretty low, 1,340, but 1,331 for the buyers here as well. So they are starting to push up against these low prices. Then we've got pressurized oxidizers. Yeah, still not seeing anything here. Reinforced carbon fibers. Actually going back down, 12,500 disc, basically still very stable. It is a new product, of course. And then we've got the ceramic fibers that are landing on 300. I'm again a little bit curious. Yeah, 330 for the sellers. This is the one where it's bad news. 245 for the buyers. That's a pretty large margin, a lack of demand that could push this one down. But in general, I would say that I am seeing a little bit more demand, a little bit more pushing up of those buy prices up against those sell prices that will hopefully keep us from again going to 1-year low points again and again, feeling like it's a very depressed market. Let's see if it keeps up, of course, in the upcoming weeks. That is starting to bother me a little bit. Can I stop? Yeah, all right, by just hovering over it, I can stop the blinking as we move on to the Tech 2 ship market, and that's coming in at 38.20. let's see if things are changing volatility wise. Well, for now, for the basilisk, that is a no. I am seeing pressure though. I can clearly see that we are again touching that low point for the almost last 10 months or so. So we're talking 100 and less than 190 for the first seller, 182 for the buyers. Unfortunately, we're not buying below 180, but you're still buying at a very low point on the chart. It's definitely considered to be considered if you don't have a basilisk investment just yet. If you try to pick one up, buy it below 185. I think it is a decent buy price, a decent stepping point. Then we get the Cerberus that unfortunately is not really willing to play ball here. Going back down to the 200 million is not on the books just yet. 223, 224 million for the sellers and 205 for the buyers. And honestly, with a chart like this, you can see here the data points here. I would be waiting for buyers below 200 million before I'm jumping in. So that one is unfortunately not yet that interesting for me. I'm still looking for these real sales, which happened. You can see that here last week in the Guardian, for instance, when we went below 180 million, and we're touching that yet again. 178 now for the sellers and 166 for the buyers. You can also see we can't browse through the buyers, but we can through the sellers. So the Guardian, in my opinion, again, is in a buy territory. Now, one warning, right? I am saying that these to me feel like real bargains. This is, you know, if you can buy a Guardian below 170 million on a chart like this does look like a pretty good price point, but don't see these as trades that you'll turn around in a week or anything like that. But you can imagine having a couple of these really cheap Guardians and then something happens in nullsec where they have to field or replace a couple of Guardian fleets, a couple of armor repping fleets, and that's when you'll have your sell opportunity. But when will that happen? That could take months, of course. Next up, we've got the Hound, which is back up above 25 million. 26 for the sellers, 23 for the buyers, so that's definitely not a jumping point. If last month you bought probably close to 20 million down here, then you do have a small trade that you can make happen right now. Ikitursa, very stable below 650, so 643 million to 612 million for the buyers. Of course, very expensive for a Tech 2 cruiser, but I think this might just show that there is, a player base that has found its way into Dryglavian space, and they're doing their thing over there, which is something that I think is interesting on the one hand, but I'm kind of wondering if this is something that's having an impact on the game as well, that we get a little bit of like a segmentation that's happening, right? We've got Dryglavian space, wormhole space. Before it was high sec, low sec, null sec, wormhole space, but now we also have Dryglavian space, and now we also have abyssal players, and for PvP now we also have the proving grounds, and all of this is creating small pots, you could say, of players where CCP has to, develop. And then we had faction warfare, which hasn't unfortunately received any love in a very, very long time. I think, that would be something to look into for CCP, but they need to get it right. And hopefully, what I would try to get towards is that you can, start to infuse these player bases and have more interactions rather than more segregated parts of the player base, which to me is what it's starting to feel like. For the Dryglavians, to me, this is a gauge of, all right, is stuff still happening in Trig space or not? And here we're pretty stable. So I think there's not like an overwhelming increase or anything like that, but it's also not dropping off a cliff. There's players that enjoy playing in the Dryglavian domain. Then we've got the Ishtar flat at 200 million. If those buyers are low enough, yeah, below 190, honestly, that's still reasonable. 204 million for the buyers. So definitely still a little bit of oversupply despite the stable period. And below 190 on the chart is not bad. Next, we've got the Manticore that's landing on 25 million. On this full chart, that's a no, but if the buyers are low enough, 24, no, that's not low enough for me. But we do see a little bit of pressure here yet again. Then we've got the Munin that basically did a 6-month low point just now, but is working its way back up. So sellers will be at 200 million, buyers 183. 183, let's see, 183, 184. So down here somewhere still, yeah, maybe, if you don't have a Munin ready, you might be able to grab a cheap one. Then we've got the Nemesis, yeah, stuck above 22.5. I'd need to see buyers well below 20 million. That's still not the case, so that's a no. Then the Oneros is again pretty low and is stabilizing here. I do think that next week will be going back up, but let's see where the sellers and buyers are at. Yeah, there we go. 166 for the sellers, below 160 at 157 for the buyers. You're buying an Oneros below 160 million. So another week where honestly, if you're looking for that Take 2 longer term investment, a couple of logistics cruisers do seem to be on the book. Then we've got the Panther going back down. We're keeping these battleships in here to get a feel of general production costs. And well, yeah, you saw carbides did normalize, stabilize, and we only have a small premium now compared to a year ago. Metamaterials are doing quite well, and the Panther is going for around 1 billion on the chart. Almost 1.1 for the sellers, but well below 1 billion for the buyers. So here I'm seeing a little bit of pressure. The Purifier is also under pressure, alright, well below 25 million, less than 24 for the sellers and 21 million for the buyers. I'd be very aggressive here. I'd want to buy as close as possible to 21 million, but on this chart, 21 million for a buying of a Purifier does make sense to me. This is another one where I think you can try to snag a very cheap one. Then we get the Scimitar, 190. Unfortunately, I think we're not looking at the best buy opportunities anymore. Well, 197 to 177, so it's still a 20 million margin, and you're buying below 180, which is still pretty damn reasonable. Yeah, logistics cruisers, I think I'll look into that for myself as well. I think I've got a couple already, but I might want a couple more. Then the Widow is, well, actually up. Very interesting. 1.2, well above 1.2 billion for the sellers and almost 1.2 billion for the buyers. So it does look like there's a little bit of difference here and there. It's called Dory and it's rather expensive. Then finally we get the Zealot that is breaking down to a 1-year low point match. We're talking 172 for the sellers and below 170 for the buyers. If you can buy below 170, that does make a lot of sense. So the Zealot as well. We saw Amar with the carbides is under pressure. This is a pretty good jumping point potentially for the Zealot. So I'm seeing some potential buy opportunities, but again, I'm looking at these as bargain hunting. Buy as low as possible to hold on, not to sell next week or even next month. This is really for the medium to longer term, when things change even more, and hopefully we see a little bit of a bigger war or something like that in Nulzik as well. So Zealot, Purifier, and pretty much all of the logistics cruisers look pretty interesting in the Take 2 market this week, at least to me. Next up, the Take 3 market coming in at 46.35. There we go, and let's see what the destroyers are doing. Confessor last week was pretty expensive, is now, in my opinion, normalizing towards 46 million ISK. So we're talking sellers coming in at 47, buyers at 44, and the averages are winning out. Not a lot of demand here. Supply-wise, last 24 hours, reasonable, 40-ish for a more expensive one. So this feels normal, and hopefully we can, stay here, find a little bit of stability. Hecate doing the same thing, staying well below 50 million, 49 for the sellers, 45 for the buyers, a little bit better demand, and well, supply-wise, a little bit more on the board, last 24 hours though, not that much. Then we've got the Jackdaw, that should drive a lot of demand. Look at that, heading back to 55 million, 56 for the sellers, 47 for the buyers, and well, last 24 hours, nothing completely crazy. We did dry up then when it comes to the other sell orders. So the Jackdaw is very, very expensive, should give, and the others are decently expensive, should give a little bit more breathing room for the Zweepel, that indeed is actually heading towards, or went towards 50 million. Yeah, almost 50 for the sellers, 44 million for the buyer. So it is very delayed, but over the course of, goddamn, not sure what the neighbors are doing, but you did get a buy opportunity well below 40 million ISK, and now you finally have the trade that I was talking about when we had all of this volatility here for all of the other cruisers. So now you have a below 40 to 50 million sell price for this vehicle. Basically, sometimes you need more patience, and this is the exact same story that I'm actually expecting in Tech 2. You get a buy at the right time, and then you get a wait for the right sell opportunity, which for this vehicle is clearly happening right now. Then we get the cruisers. Here is the Legion normalizing. I would say this is pretty average, 185 to 170. That's sort of affordable, I would say. The Loki's also going back down in price, 185 to 173. It's pretty much the same price range as the Legion. Proteus is then at 179 to 172, so that's for the least popular one, very much in line with what we're seeing for the Loki and for the Proteus. Bit more less expensive sell-wise, by price or uniform across the board so far. And then the Tengu is going back down a little bit as well, 190 to 179. My strategy for the Tech 3 cruisers would be simple. If you're ever planning to fly one, train those skills. You can buy the hull right now for a buy order pretty cheaply, and honestly, Tech 3 cruisers are quite useful in a lot of the events that CCP has been putting out. I think want to eventually get into the Tengu shields, missiles. So that makes a lot of sense to me right there. So I'd say Tech 3 cruisers, pretty stable, pretty uniform, and decently affordable at the moment. Which will bring us to the extra product for the week, and yeah, we're gonna go back to some faction stuff. Faction battleships coming in at, let's say, 50 minutes. Let's see what these have been doing. Battleships, let's start as Navy faction, and where the hell is the pirates? Oh, that's battle cruisers. Battleships, faction battleships, and we usually start with the pirate faction battleship. So here is the Bargus chart. Alright, I think all of the announcements that have been made though, with less PI needed, I think that's needed in this as well. Industry, let's take a look at this. No, that's not correct. I actually need to go here because that's the reprocessing batch. That this was being reduced a little bit for a faction, if I'm not mistaken. Correct me in the comments if I'm wrong on that. But I would say relatively good news. The Bargus is going down in price, less than 1.5 billion for the sellers, 1.4 billion for the buyers. Still pretty expensive, of course, but at least we are seeing a little bit of a downtrend. Next up, we've got the Macarial that I think is a bit more plentiful, also seeing some pressure, but really not willing to break down too much. Still, 763 million for the sellers, 707 million for the buyers. Far more reasonable, I would say, than 800 and above. So we're basically seeing a bit of pressure on these pirate faction battleships so far. The Nestor seems to be an exception though, back up above 1.25 billion, 1 year high point right now, 1.3 billion for the sellers, 1.2 billion for the buyers. Very, very expensive Nestor. Then we get the Nightmare that also saw a 1 year high point just at the start of the month, is seeing a little bit of pressure from that, but is still super expensive, above 1.1 billion for the sellers and almost 1.1 for the buyers. The Balgorn 1 year high point, man, I thought that we were onto something with the Bargus and the Macarial, but unfortunately another 1 year high point, 750 million for the sellers, 673 for the buyers. Rattlesnake, yeah, then you get into the PvE King here, staying above a billion ISK. We went to 1 year high point at 1.1 just at the start of November, but basically there's no real downturn to be spotted here. Way above a billion for the sellers, just below a billion for the buyers. And then finally the Vindicator is also seeing a little bit of a pushback, but it's still relative yet again. From 1.5 billion high point, it is still costing 1.4 billion for the sellers and 1.3 for the buyers. So while the Bargus and then the Macarial gave us a little bit of hope, unfortunately this is just from ridiculous price ranges for the Bargus down to very expensive price ranges, and we get a couple of 1 year high points in these as well. Pirate faction battleships are super expensive at the moment, is basically my read on this. Then we get the Navy faction battleships. Here is the Thunderchild. Going below a billion, that's still kind of expensive. A billion for the sellers, 900,000 for the buyers. Is basically a lack of demand that's keeping this one in check, and that's really it. Apocalypse Navy issue went to 1 year high point of 700 million, is recovering back down. 555 for the sellers, 512 for the buyers. Start of the year just below 500 million. That's sort of better. Armageddon Navy issue is going for 600 million for the sellers, 550 for the buyers. All right, that's expensive, but it's not completely crazy like the Barghest about a month ago. Dominic's Navy issue going for around 600 million as well, 630 to 600 million for the buyers. That's also reasonable. Megatron Navy issue slightly more expensive in the last couple of weeks, 650 for the sellers, 612 for the buyers. I think a little bit more demand here. Raven Navy issue 600 million as well, 613 for the sellers, 567 for the buyers. That's also doable, I would say, for a good PvE platform. Scorpion Navy issue 550-ish, 557 to less than 500 million. Tempest Fleet issue next, also back below 600 million. Sellers are at 590, buyers 530, and then the Typhoon fleet issue back below 600 million as well. That's a bit more uniform of a move, 600 million down to 550. So for the Navy faction battleships, we do have a little bit of a pullback in general on these prices, and it looks like you're paying 500 to 600 million ISK for most of these faction battleships. One exception is of course the Thunderchild, which is an Edencom battleship. That's quite unique. You're still paying a billion, but that's also honestly a reasonable price, I would say here on the price check. So we are recovering a little bit in the Navy faction battleships, and we're only getting rid of some of the most outlandish prices in the pirate faction battleships. And that's it for this EVE Talk, guys. Thank you very much for watching, and as always, I'll see you next time.